You stand in a corridor of white stone, sunlight spilling like liquid fire across the polished floor. The air tastes of salt and lotus oil. Behind the doors ahead, a girl is being prepared for her wedding, to a man older than her father. You can hear the soft clatter of gold bracelets, the murmured prayers of attendants who dare not look her in the eye. Before we step through those doors, take a breath. If you're drawn to stories where history reveals its cruelties behind jeweled curtains, where love and power become indistinguishable, then join us. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. It's extraordinary to imagine this vast, global circle of listeners, scattered from Cairo to Toronto, all witnessing the same moment. A girl, 15 years old, about to be sold to a throne. The girl's name is Arsinoe, daughter of Ptolemy I, the Macedonian general who carved Egypt from the corpse of Alexander's empire. Alexandria, his shining creation, is only 20 years old, a city of philosophers and mercenaries, priests and dreamers. And in its heart, Arsinoe learns her first lesson, that empire is not built on glory, but on the quiet suffering of its women. Her father calls her philtate, beloved, but his affection is a transaction. The old conqueror has grown cautious, his hand trembling over the chessboard of kings. In Thrace, across the Aegean, rules Lysimachus, once a companion of Alexander, now a king surrounded by enemies. Ptolemy sees opportunity in the man's desperation, a daughter for an alliance, a girl for a border secured. When he tells her, Arsinoe is silent. The torches flicker on the bronze of her earrings. "You will be queen," her father says, his voice roughened by age and wine, "a goddess among men, and you will honor our house." The attendants say she nodded, obedient, as was expected. But years later, one of her scribes would write of that night, how her fingers dug crescent moons into her palms until they bled. Lysimachus arrives with an army's worth of finery, elephants draped in dyed linen, courtiers with Persian beards and Thracian scars. His hair is white, his face carved with the map of too many campaigns. To the Greeks, his name still commands respect. To Arsinoe, it must have seemed like death disguised as majesty. The wedding takes place beneath the half-built columns of the Alexandrian Serapeum, the air thick with incense and ambition. Priests chant hymns that blur the line between prayer and bargain. She stands beside the old king, her veil a curtain between herself and the world. When he takes her hand, she does not flinch, but the witnesses see her mouth form a single word, silent and sharp as a blade. Remember. What did she mean by it? Perhaps it was a plea to herself, perhaps a promise. In the months that follow, Arsinoe learns the art of survival at a foreign court. Thrace is cold and brutal, wind howling through the fortresses of Lysimachia, soldiers drilling in the mud. She is alone among strangers, her tongue tripping over their dialect. Yet even here she watches, listens, learns. She studies the alliances of her husband's sons, the jealousies of his generals, the frailties of old power. To Lysimachus she becomes the dutiful queen, soft voice, measured smile. But behind her calm eyes, a strategist begins to awaken. The old king is bewitched by her composure. He boasts that the gods have favored him with wisdom and youth in a single union. When ambassadors from Macedon visit, Arsinoe sits beside him, her face carved from serenity, while her mind calculates every word. She understands what few men do, that influence is built not by shouting in council, but by knowing who fears what and why. Still, the ghosts of her homeland follow her. Letters from Egypt arrive with her father's seal, filled with reports of shifting alliances, of brothers and sisters married into rival dynasties. One night she burns one of those letters, the smoke rising like an omen. The next morning, a Thracian servant finds her standing on the balcony, her gaze fixed eastward, toward the sea, toward Alexandria. History often remembers queens as symbols, But here Arsinoe becomes something else, the prototype of the Hellenistic woman king, educated, ruthless, and exiled from childhood's simplicity. Every gesture, every silence becomes part of her armor. When Lysimachus goes to war against his own son, Agathocles, rumors whisper that Arsinoe's counsel guided him. Some say she feared the young prince's influence, others that she sought to secure her own children's inheritance. Whatever the truth, the act brands her with a new kind of power and guilt. The man who dies is her husband's son, nearly her own age, and from that moment the palace ceases to trust her smiles. Lysimachus grows paranoid, haunted by dreams of betrayal. His court fractures, his generals look to Seleucus, the eastern king, for salvation. In the midst of it all, Arsinoe stands untouched, composed, the perfect image of wifely devotion. But behind her veil, she begins to imagine a world where she is not traded, not commanded, a world she shapes herself. And so the girl once bartered for peace becomes the woman who learns to barter fate itself. Yet, as she watches her husband's kingdom crumble, as armies march toward their ruin and her children sleep unaware, the question must have lingered like incense smoke in her chamber. Was this the destiny her father promised, or the curse he placed upon her? When the first reports arrive that Seleucus has crossed the Hellespont, Arsinoe walks to the ramparts at dawn. The wind tears at her veil. Below her, the world is shifting again. She closes her eyes, and for the first time, she does not pray. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Egypt waits, and with it the next betrayal. Night in Macedon smells of smoke and iron. The wind claws at the cypress trees as a chariot flees through the darkness, its wheels slicing through mud and memory alike. In it, a woman clutches her children. 3 sons, the last fragments of a dying dynasty. Behind her, torches bloom like malignant stars. She does not weep. She cannot. There is no time left for softness. This is Arsinoe, once queen of Thrace, once daughter of Egypt's founder, now a fugitive running from the empire her marriage helped destroy. The road to Pella is long and littered with ghosts. The corpse of Lysimachus, her husband, lying cold on the battlefield of Corupedium. The whispers of betrayal that followed her across the Aegean. Every hoofbeat seems to ask the same question. Where does a queen go when her kingdom has turned to dust? When she reaches Macedon, the gates open not for love, but for calculation. On the throne sits Ptolemy I, her half-brother. Once exiled, now king by murder. He had slain Seleucus, seized the crown, and declared himself the heir of both Macedon and Egypt. His rule is as thin as a blade's edge, and when Arsinoe appears, desperate and radiant in her widow's black, he sees both danger and opportunity. The chroniclers tell us he offered her sanctuary. They do not record his smile when he said it. "Sister," he called her, rising from the throne of her father's homeland. "We are the blood of the same lion. Let us rule together, as the gods once ruled." In another age the words might have been comfort. In this one, they are a curse. Arsinoe hesitated. To return to Egypt was impossible. Her father's successors had chosen other heirs. To stay alone meant death. The court murmured of her beauty, of her intelligence, of the way her eyes no longer softened even when she spoke of her sons. Perhaps she knew what Kharanos wanted, and understood that power, even tainted, was the only weapon left to her. Their union was announced in the spring, under a sky of pale gold. Macedon gasped. Greek poets spat verses of disgust. The marriage of brother and sister was unholy, a barbarian perversion, they said. Yet the marriage of Zeus and Hera, of Isis and Osiris, had once bound heaven and earth. Arsinoe, daughter of 2 worlds, knew the paradox intimately. What Greece called sin, Egypt called sanctity. At the wedding feast, the courtiers bowed low but kept their eyes averted. Arsinoe wore a crown shaped like a cobra's hood, its gold reflecting the torchlight. Carounos drank deeply, proclaiming that no mortal laws could bind the house of Ptolemy. "We are divine," he roared, "and the divine are answerable only to themselves." She raised her cup, and the flicker in her gaze was not reverence, it was calculation. But beneath the divine mask, rot spreads quickly. The soldiers whispered that their new queen still mourned Lysimachus, that she wrote letters in secret. Carounos's paranoia, always near the surface, festered, and Arsinoe's children, 3 boys, heirs of Thrace, were living proof that her loyalties could never belong entirely to him. The first omen came at dusk. A servant found a falcon dead on the palace steps, its wings torn open, its eyes pecked out. To the Macedonians, it meant nothing. To Arsinoe, daughter of Egypt, it was a warning from Horus himself. Blood would soon spill in the house of the gods. Days later, the king summoned her. The hall smelled of wine and bronze. Her sons stood beside her, boys too young to understand what power demanded. Carounos's voice was soft, almost tender. "You have deceived me," he said. "You plot against your own blood." "I have plotted only to survive," Arsinoe answered. Her tone was calm, regal. "Would you kill your sister to silence your fear?" His answer came in motion. The guards stepped forward. The eldest boy cried out her name. What followed would stain Macedon for generations. 2 sons struck down before her eyes. The third dragged from her arms. The marble floor slick with innocence, the torches wavering in the wind of a scream that history still struggles to forget. When it ended, Carounos turned to her. His face was ash-pale, his crown askew. "Now," he said, "you are mine alone." But in that moment, something inside Arsinoe hardened beyond breaking. She looked at him, the brother, the murderer, the self-made god, and saw not terror but clarity. If this was divinity, then she would learn to wield it. If this was what power demanded, she would become its mirror. That night, she escaped. Disguised as a servant, veiled and barefoot, she slipped from the palace while the city slept. Some say a sympathetic guard turned away, others that she bribed him with the last of her jewels. By dawn, she was gone, her surviving son hidden among loyal retainers, her heart carved hollow. Behind her, Carounos's reign unraveled swiftly. Barbarian raiders crossed the borders. His generals deserted him. Within a year, he was captured and killed, his severed head paraded on a spear, the gods' verdict on his blasphemy. And Arsinoe. She vanished into legend. For months, the ports whispered her name, seen in Samothrace, in Ephesus, always veiled, always alone. She was no longer the child sold to a throne, nor the bride of a corpse. She was something new, a survivor forged in betrayal's fire. But even as she hid, the world turned toward Egypt again. A new Ptolemy sat upon the Nile's throne, her younger brother, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus. And from the shadows of exile, Arsinoe began to move once more toward a destiny that would defy gods, nations, and history itself. For though her sons lay buried, her ambition did not. It waited, coiled and patient, beneath the same stars that had once witnessed her flight. And somewhere in that silence, the widow of Macedon whispered a vow that only the gods could hear. "If blood is the price of power, then I will pay it and make the world kneel for it." The Nile glitters beneath the morning sun, the current slow and deliberate as if time itself has learned to hesitate. From the harbor of Alexandria, a small ship drifts toward the palace quays, its sail white as bone. Among the veiled passengers stands a woman who has outlived her husbands, her sons, her innocence. The guards who watch her arrival do not yet know that Egypt's destiny disembarks with her. Arsinoe of Egypt has come home. Years have passed since her flight from Macedon, years spent wandering among temples, islands, and foreign courts. But exile has not dimmed her, only refined her. When she steps onto Egyptian soil, the people see not the widow of a murdered king but a figure carved from endurance itself. Her eyes, lined by desert winds, hold the cold lucidity of someone who has seen gods bleed and men play at divinity. In Alexandria, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, her younger brother, reigns alone. Scholars praise his learning, priests his piety, but the court whispers of weakness, of a ruler more suited to scrolls than swords. When Arsinoe returns, veiled in mourning, her presence ripples through the palace like an omen. The brother who once idolized her now finds himself standing before a legend. Their first meeting is not recorded in words, only in silence. She kneels before him, or appears to, and when she rises, their eyes meet like flint striking flint. Between them lies a shared childhood, a fractured dynasty, and an unspoken understanding. Together they can remake what their father began. But how does a woman condemned by scandal become divine? How does one transform sin into sovereignty? In Egypt there is precedent. The pharaohs of old had married their sisters, binding blood to blood in imitation of Isis and Osiris, of the gods who ruled before the world began. The Greeks had sneered at such unions, calling them barbaric. Yet Arsinoe had learned something in her years of ruin, that power survives by rewriting the language of shame. The decision, when it came, was announced not as a marriage but as revelation. The royal heralds declared that Ptolemy and Arsinoe were not mere mortals, but theoi Philadelphoi, the brother-loving gods. The court gasped, the temples trembled, and the city's philosophers argued through the night. Was this hubris or holiness? Blasphemy or restoration? Arsinoe understood the symbolism better than any priest. If Greece saw corruption, Egypt saw continuity. By wedding her brother, she did not fall into sin. She ascended into myth. Her coronation took place beneath a canopy of gold, the air thick with incense and prophecy. The crowds pressed against the palace gates, chanting her name, Arsinoe, the syllables rising like prayer. She wore a double crown, the diadem of Greece entwined with the cobra of the Nile. When she lifted her hands to the sky, even the skeptics bowed. In that moment, the survivor of Thrace became Arsinoe Philadelphus, goddess of Egypt. Coinage began to bear her image beside her brother's. Statues rose from the delta to the Fayum, her likeness serene and untouchable. In the sanctuary of Alexandria, priests chanted her hymns beside those of Isis. The boundaries between woman and divinity blurred, until there was no difference at all. And yet, behind the marble and ceremony, something restless remained. The queen, who had endured betrayal and exile, did not forget the human cost of godhood. Each ritual, each divine procession, was both triumph and erasure. To be eternal, she had to kill the last remnant of the mortal woman she once was, the girl who had bled in silence, the mother who had screamed over her children's bodies. Was it victory or self-obliteration? Did she ascend or vanish? One account, written decades later, describes her walking alone through the palace gardens at dusk. The lotus ponds shimmered with torchlight, and her reflection floated ghost-like on the water. A priest approached and dared to ask, "Great Queen, do you remember what it was to be mortal?" Arsinoe looked down at her reflection and whispered, "Every god remembers." Under her influence, Egypt prospered. Trade expanded, temples flourished, and Greek scholars found patronage beside Egyptian priests. The merging of two civilizations, Greek intellect and Egyptian sanctity, became the hallmark of her reign. Yet even as her name was carved into the walls of temples, she seemed to drift further from herself, dissolving into her own legend. Her death, when it came, was marked not by mourning but by ritual. Priests declared that Arsinoe had joined the stars, her spirit ascending beside Isis. Her cult spread across the Mediterranean, her image worshipped as both queen and protector. Sailors prayed to her before crossing the sea. Widows invoked her name in grief. She had succeeded where kings had failed. She had made herself immortal. But immortality has its cost. Centuries later, when the last of the Ptolemies fell and Rome claimed Egypt, her statues were defaced, her temples abandoned. Only the coins remained, her face preserved in silver, serene, unknowable, eternal. A woman who survived the destruction of empires by turning herself into one. Even now, her story lingers, a paradox that refuses to fade. The queen who made incest divine, the exile who returned as a goddess, the woman who transcended ruin by becoming its embodiment. In the end, Arsinoe Philadelphus did not conquer her world. She became it, and as the Nile flows endlessly toward the sea, carrying the silt of centuries, one can almost hear her voice in its whisper, patient, distant, and proud. I was not loved. I was worshipped.